There are very few times in which real life political shit happens and the fictional characters that I talk about converge, and this is one of them. Hey Diva, welcome to the channel. If you guys are new, hi, my name is Deborah. Welcome to my channel where I talk about my favorite TV shows, movies, and books. And the video is going to be very, very interesting today because we have something very, very deep to talk about. But before that, a few words. First of all, thank you so much for everyone who loved my last two videos. Like, since then, around 2,000 of you have subscribed to the channel. Girl, thank you so much. Happy to introduce new divas into the channel. Number two, I think I'm feeling more comfortable calling you guys divas because I feel like that's very much my state of mind sometimes. On this channel, we're a bunch of divas. Do you know what I'm saying? Let me know down in the comments if you guys are okay with me calling you divas because I think that's super cute. I want to say, hey, diva. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. And I have heard the criticisms. The subtitles will stay. And I will try and add as many clips as I possibly can. However, the last time I did Hunger Games and clips, I got copyright struck like there was no fucking tomorrow. Lionsgate did not take its foot off my neck, and YouTube unfortunately doesn't allow you to appeal to a third party. You appeal to the person who copyright struck you. That doesn't make any sense. So I will do my best with the clips, y'all, but without further ado, let's get into it. So if you have been living under a rock or you haven't, President Trump announced that he wants to introduce something, or the 250th anniversary of the United States, that he wanted to basically start something called the Patriot Games. This event is slated to be in the fall, so in the later half of the year, or the 250th anniversary of the United States, that he wanted to basically start something called the Patriot Games. This event is slated to be in the fall, so in the later half of the year, and specifically in his words, he says, "In the fall, we will host first ever Patriot Games, an unprecedented 4-day athletic event featuring the greatest high school athletes, one young man and one young woman from each state and each territory." And immediately, this reminded everyone of the Hunger Games. If you've ever read or watched anything about dystopian media, you know that this was a red flag for everybody. If you guys are not familiar with my channel, for those of you who are new here, I am an avid watcher and lover of the Hunger Games. I love the Hunger Games. Okay, I've made multiple videos. I have a whole entire playlist about everything Hunger Games like. And it's one of the things that helped started my channel when I started analyzing the Hunger Games, and I still do it now and then. However, it can be really heavy, so I do take a break. But one of my most ever famous videos was dissecting President Snow and how he came to rise in power in the world of panem. For some of you who haven't seen the Hunger Games, and this is your first ever video, I will explain all of that in detail, but basically, the dictator that was President Snow has a lot of eerie similarities to, I guess, President Trump, and should I say, any authoritarian regime if you look around the world. I wanted to dissect it. I wanted to do a little deep dive on what this could mean, why people are so worried about this, why this is something that we should be taking super, super seriously. And I think that with these Patriot Games, it's not just some hoopla idea that Trump has just decided to pull out of his act, but it's symbolic and it means something. So let's get into it. Let's talk about these two people individually. I have my notes, so I will be looking at my laptop sometimes. So let's talk about who this Coriolanus Snow person is. In the world of the Hunger Games, you have to remember that the Hunger Games is ruled in a country called Panem. Panem is actually very much based on the district distribution of the United States. And we can look at the map of Panem and see quite a lot of similarities, which is also like a huge red flag already, but that's besides the point. So Coriolanus Snow was this autocrat who ruled as the tyrannical president of Panem for more than 2 decades. In his youth, he was known as Corio or Coriolanus, and he was born originally into a wealthy family, into the Snow family. However, the Snow family, when he was growing up, began to fade into insignificance because there was a war that happened and it introduced something called the Dark Days. So those who are in the capital of Panem are these extremely wealthy families who had a lot of access to money, and they basically were sucking all the resources, and then everybody else were district members, right? You lived in your little district and everything was controlled by the capital. There was a war which led to the Dark Days, in which basically the districts started to rebel against the capital, and this was even before the Hunger Games itself existed. This rebellion was a huge deal, and unfortunately, due to a lot of sabotage, the rebels did not win. And there was a lot happening to the people who lived in the capital, right? So that's why they call them the Dark Days, because a lot of people do not have access to food. Like, the capital is used to having an excess. Fresh berries, fresh whatever was always available to them. And so to these people to be going through a war, that the districts were the ones who were doing the work, creating everything, creating all the resources, doing the farming, the fishing, all of that. And they were basically sending it to the capital. And because of the war, the districts stopped doing that. And so the capital did suffer, and they called it the Dark Days. Unfortunately, the rebels did not win, and the capital stayed in power. However, a lot of important families died as a result. A lot of people died in the capital, and as punishment, Casca Highbottom suggested while he was in high school that a suitable punishment for the districts for rebelling against the capital would be to create these games in which the district's children would fight against one another in the event that we now know as the Hunger Games. However, it is important to note, and I will come back to this point later, the suggestion was not to be taken seriously. Casca Highbottom literally just stated it because, well, he thought it was funny, haha, kiki, and then it was actually taken seriously by Dr. Volumina Gall and Coriolanus Snow's father, Crassus Snow. However, once again, no one thought that this would actually come into fruition, but all it took was one person, who was Dr. Volumina Gall, and some maybe people in power to implement the idea, even though it wasn't fully developed to be the spectacle that it became later on. It's important to note the origins of the Hunger Games because, again, we are being introduced to these Patriot games as if it's nothing, as if it's just something that is being handed out and it's not a big deal. But that is how these things and these problems start. It's just an idea until it gets further developed, and then it gets used later down the line against more and more people. That's why people are also freaking out about this, is because the mere suggestion and the speaking of it into existence should be unthinkable, period. Unfortunately, that is not what this administration is doing. It's also important to note that at this time, the whole entire capital was not in line with the Hunger Games. A lot of people actually looked down on it. They thought it was barbaric. They thought it was weird. And it was only a very, very few amount of people who tuned into the games. And what they would do in the capital is that each capital child who had access to good education within the capital would have to sort of be a mentor in every year's games until we get to the point where Snow enters this program and he becomes a mentor for Lucy Gray in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and that's how he gets involved into the Hunger Games, and then it becomes something way bigger. All it took was the right person and the right mind and the right amount of manipulation, and the Hunger Games that was once looked down upon became a public spectacle where people would cheer on children's death. The thing about Snow is that in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, his book, you can hear his life story through his POV. He's also an extremely unreliable narrator the whole entire time because you're listening to somebody who definitely is on the spectrum of either sociopathy. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say anything too much about that, but he's definitely on the spectrum and there somewhere, okay? And you can hear it in his thoughts how he not only places so much self-importance on himself, on image, which I'll talk about in a bit, but also you can see his slow descent into insanity and madness and how his slow disregard and lack of empathy for people manifests bit by bit until he becomes a full-on dictator. So that is who President Snow is, right? It's important to go to the source of who Snow represents and why Suzanne Collins chose Coriolanus, the name Coriolanus, and the significance of that, right? Because that will help us dissect a lot of the archetypes that we'll be talking about in the rest of this video. The name Coriolanus is actually mostly inspired by the Shakespearean play Coriolanus. Suzanne Collins has definitely alluded to a lot of Shakespearean characters within her work. You see that also with Lucy Gray's story, her origins, a lot of the people in the districts, you see a lot of Shakespearean influence. Again, she did not have to look a crazy amount to find inspiration as to what this kind of archetype this person is, right? So Coriolanus is the name given to a Roman general after his military success against various uprisings challenging the government of Rome. So following the success, Coriolanus becomes super active in politics and he wants to be leader. He seeks political leadership. And unfortunately, his temperament is not suited for leadership. He is not actually a good leader. He has a military prowess, but he does not care for the people. He is quickly disposed, and while he's in government, he very much focuses on his own selfish will. Eventually, the alliances that he forges will result in his own ultimate downfall and death, and eventually his death will be caused due to a popular rebellion. Because, I don't know, when you choose to be a selfish authoritarian leader, the people will not like you and they will revolt at a certain point. All of these characters, Coriolanus Snow and Coriolanus from Shakespeare, come into power by very much killing people. President Snow, literally at a certain point, starts just poisoning people. He poisons Casca Highbottom to be able to move up the ladder. He uses Dr. Volumina Gall's guidance, like she becomes his mentor. She's evil, by the way, for the people who don't know. And he uses that as an opportunity to climb up the ladder within the world of Panem. And it gets to a point where he's so used to poisoning people that towards the actual trilogy of the Hunger Games books, he starts coughing out blood so much from the sores that have been developed in his mouth and in his throat from all the years of poisoning people and simultaneously poisoning himself by eating the same food and then taking the antidote. So he's done that so many times that it's now opened up places in his mouth that every time he coughed out blood. And he's been doing that for years, despite having the antidote. That is how ruthless that man is, okay? This, to me, definitely sets the precedence of somebody who comes into power, weaponizes everything that they have, does it for their own selfish will, is not a good leader, who is an authoritarian, right? And that's the archetype that is contained here. I think people forget that it's not necessarily just about Donald Trump and it's not just about him alone. Like, there's many other archetypes of these leaders all around the world that are dictators and authoritarians. And that's why even if Trump wasn't in power, because a lot of people like to argue that the only reason that people are freaking out about this is because Trump suggested it. No, if there was another person who was in power who had similar characteristics, who was authoritarian, this would still be a concern. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's about the archetype of person. It's about the person that is in power who does not care for the people, cares for himself and his following elites, right? And that is what the name Coriolanus itself symbolizes. And when you compare these two people, you see the eerie similarities. This is something that is also touched upon by Donald Sutherland himself. May his soul rest in peace. He was the actor who played the older version of President Snow.
And if there's any question as to what it's an allegory for, I will tell you. It is the powers that be in the United States of America. It's profiteers. War is for profit. It's not to save the world for democracy or for king and country. No, bullshit. It's for the profit of the top 10%. And the young people who will see this film must recognize that in the future, blind faith in their leaders, as Bruce Springsteen said, will get you dead.
Snow has to pay for what he's done.
I find it amazing that the actor who had to get into the role of playing such a dictator understood himself the importance of seeing this on film, how much less we as the common people. But let's get into it. Why do I say that these two people, these two caricatures? Because to me, sometimes Trump very much represents a caricature of a person rather than being like a fully developed, emotionally caring human being. Okay. Why are these two so similar?
An eerie similarity between both Panem and, should I say, current day America, and how both Trump and Snow rule their subsequent countries is that they both have a lot of authoritarian similarities. Authoritarianism, because I feel like that word gets thrown around quite often, authoritarianism in politics and government is the blind submission to authority and the repression of individual freedom of thought and action. Authoritarian regimes are systems of government that have no established mechanism for the transfer of executive power and do not afford their citizens civil liberties or political rights. In an authoritarian state, the leader engages in unconstitutional or undemocratic practices for the purpose of consolidating power. The key components of authoritarianism include rejecting democratic rules, denying the legitimacy of opponents, tolerating and encouraging political violence, and curtailing the civil liberties of opponents. This is something that President Snow very much engages in. It's important to know that there are different types of authoritarianism, and Panem definitely falls under a totalitarian dictatorship, which is definitely a form of authoritarianism. However, you can see the eerie similarities, as President Trump also exhibits key indicators of authoritarian behavior. He undermines the legitimacy of the elections that the Republicans lost in 2016. He basically describes his rivals as criminals, even though he is kind of technically one himself. He refused to ambiguously condemn violence committed by his supporters on January 6th, and if you speak out against him, he threatens to punish his critics and members of the media, or even just outright deports them. These are things that President Snow would do and more. In the world of Panem, there are no other ways to criticize Panem through media, so anyone who speaks out against the world of Panem or against the Capitol or President Snow would be killed immediately. Panem is a totalitarian dictatorship, and if anyone tries to step out of line, they face immediate death, and so does the rest of their family. While America is not a totalitarian regime yet, the eerie similarities are there.
President Snow was also involved in a lot of child trafficking. In the Hunger Games trilogy, Finnick Odair was the one to expose this. However, it's very much alluded to within the world of panem that there is a lot of child abuse, and also child sexual assault, child harassment, and also child traffic. Basic maltreatment of children and the dehumanization of children. To be fighting for these games has dehumanized people a lot to what children should be treated like. And unfortunately, it becomes so normalized through these games that children get treated as commodity, even just because they're district. And even in the capital, they're not necessarily safe. Even when these kids fight to the death and they win, they are not safe. And that was the story of Finnick Odair. But Finnick Odair was one of the tributes in the, I forgot the number of the Hunger Games, but Finnick Odair, despite all the odds, wins, right? He's in love with this girl called Annie, and Annie has been absolutely traumatized and is going through mental issues. So when Finnick wins as a teenager, Snow knows that he is in love with Annie. All he wants to do is go back home, win his earnings, and go back to the love of his life, Annie. After killing other children in cold blood, Snow forces Finnick Odair, because of his looks and because of the people that find him attractive, a child, mind you, Snow forces Finnick to be trafficked to other people in the capital. Finnick, as a result, tries to survive, and basically what he tries to do is that with everybody that he is forced to have a sexual relationship with, he collects their secrets and tries to survive in that route by using their secrets or keeping their secrets or gaining favors through that route to preserve himself and to preserve his life. He could not publicly say that out loud because he would be killed if he said that out loud. That's the kind of state that panem is censorship. You are never allowed to open your mouth and tell what's really happening in the capital. I think this is eerie because in the last year and a half, we've been talking about how Donald Trump has been in cahoots with Epstein. They've released the Epstein file. Well, I don't think they've released all the Epstein files, but some of the files have been released. And the amount of evidence that Donald Trump has had with Jeffrey Epstein.
I mean, this photo alone speaks volumes. Here's Donald Trump with his children, Eric and Ivanka, standing next to Jeffrey and John Casablancas. Donald Trump was fully aware of who both Jeffrey and John Casablancas were and what they were capable of, and he is willingly having his children stand right next to them.
Signing off a picture and on the woman's vaginal parts, right, signing his name, finding no problem to objectify women and also to objectify his own child. If you remember how Trump discusses his own children, his own child, Ivanka, about like how if Ivanka was his child, like he'd sleep with her. That's disgusting.
On top of having an inappropriate relationship with her and exploiting her, he also put her directly into harm's way over and over and over again throughout her entire childhood. Ivanka was so young and thrust into this world that she knew nothing about, that her father helped to shape and mold, and he knew exactly the belly of the beast that he was putting his own daughter.
There are some amazing links and journalists, real independent journalists who talk about this. Becca Day is one of my favorites. I will put her links down in the description below so you guys can go down that rabbit hole. It's insane. And Virginia recently released her book talking about event by event how she was trafficked through this whole and how people like Trump knew about this. I think that is the first glaring red flag that both of these people are very comfortable with crossing boundaries with women and children. The second thing I think is super important that is so similar between these characters is the obsession with appearance, with surgery, and with image. If you don't know, President Snow, as he continues in his dictatorship, basically, he gets more weird looking plastic surgery. Like his lips at a certain point become too enlarged and he looks almost alien. If you guys don't know and you're new to the channel, you're new to the Hunger Games, basically a lot of the people in the Capitol, like half of the Capitol does not look normal. People still look strange. Like there's some people who prided themselves in literally looking somewhat like animals, tattooing their skin. Tigress, his cousin, President Snow's cousin, also does this. It's kind of like upside down in the world, where the more strange and alien you look, the more capital you seem, right? The more outer worldly you seem, the more you seem super rich to be able to do that. So when Katniss goes through the games and she has these two stylists besides Cinna, in the books, the stylists are actually like their skins are, I think, green and pink. So strange. And when they walk outside of the Capitol and they come to visit Katniss, they look strange compared to everybody else because it's not normal. And Snow himself is very, very concerned with his appearance. He's constantly getting plastic surgery. But in the world of the Capitol, that is normalized, right? I think the only few people that don't get surgery are characters like Plutarch. And then that's kind of it. Like everyone looks super strange. Okay. And I cannot help but think about the similarities as to how Trump not only is obsessed with himself and doing his own makeup, okay, making himself look super orange. You also see this with the Mar-a-Lago face, right? Everyone in Trump's administration, every woman, every person, every woman has Mar-a-Lago face, right? It's a certain type of look that is not natural. That doesn't even make them look good. That's the worst part. These women do not look great. They're naturally beautiful. Unfortunately, they are falling under the pressure of looking like a certain sort of exaggerated Barbie doll that doesn't fit their face, and they all end up with this, Mar-a-Lago face. It's interesting because these people have access to money and they don't do better for themselves. Instead, they make themselves look worse. Same thing with people in the Capitol and same thing with President Snow. I think that's such a close similarity. And I think the reason is to be able to differentiate. There could be more reasons to it. Again, this is just like a personal conclusion, but I think it's it's very much a thing of status. It's a thing of like, I have the money to be able to afford this plastic surgery and you don't. I think it's very much like a status thing. I think there's also, especially with Mar-a-Lago face, I think there's just a general pressure, just like how you see with like the Mormons and the Mormon TikTok girlies, the Mormon wives who will get plastic surgery and they just look so unnatural and they all look the same. It's to fit a certain hive mentality, right? It's to fit a certain look. It's to fit a certain aesthetic that is going for. Even if it doesn't look great, the point is you can afford to make yourself look like that. You can afford to get the lip fillers. You can afford to get the surgery. You can afford to get the exaggerated looks. The everyday common person cannot do that. And I think that's very much like a status signaling. Like, I think that's why these women keep on doing this Mar-a-Lago face to fit in, but it's also a thing of status. And I think with Trump as well, if it's also a status, he wants to pride himself in looking great, even though he doesn't look great. And that's not even me being shady. It's crazy how this man has allowed to be orange for so long. Like, I genuinely don't understand what we're doing. I think that's also a very eerie similarity. It's important to note that authoritarianism also relies so much on image, right? That's also the big conclusion, is that authoritarianism needs an image. It needs a united image, right? You see that in North Korea. You see that in other regimes where there needs to be a united image and nothing can cross out of that. And I feel like the fact that we all see these women looking uniform, it is to create a united image for Trump's administration, for this regime, for this new authoritarian America. I think another thing that is also super important as well is censorship, and this ties in with image, but image and censorship are also two similarities. One of the reasons that panem is so impermeable for a long time is because the Capitol has mastered propaganda. Every single channel that is watched in every district household is being monitored. There is cameras everywhere in the world of panem. In every single district, you cannot do anything without it being known. But what the Capitol does is, instead of live broadcasting it, they override whatever is happening in real life with panem propaganda. Literally, they'll be showing you videos and videos and videos of how this is great, about how the Hunger Games can be such a celebratory thing, about these victors, right? Meanwhile, the victors could be crashing out somewhere, running for their fucking lives. The Capitol will never show that. And many times in the books and also in the film, you hear a lot about how the Capitol makes sure that they master the propaganda that they show the people. So even if someone has died under suspicious circumstance, in the games as well, if somebody dies under weird circumstances, the audience will never know. In the book of Sunrise and the Reaping, with this character called Haymitch, right? President Snow is in power, and Haymitch, in every step of the way in his games, rebels. And at a certain point, Haymitch thinks okay, if the people realized that I did this and I'm doing my best, only for him to look back at the footage and to see that the live footage had been edited out. And it made him look a certain way. It made him look like some sort of bad boy. Like, they remodeled reality and they presented that as reality to people. This sort of blatant censorship is happening in the world of panem, and it's also happening in real life. I mean, there's so many times when TikTok was about to get banned, so many people were not able to share videos to be able to talk about certain things. Even though this administration is fighting for free speech, even though we know they're not really fighting for free speech, they're fighting for the ability to say crazy things without consequences, but that's another story for another day. Censorship happening with these Epstein files, for example. There's so much censorship happening, and I cannot help but see that pattern as well. Update, it's day 2 of filming because this video took me longer than I thought it would, so I'm in a new outfit. Hope you guys don't mind. Let's continue. I also wanted to talk about something super interesting that I haven't seen much people talk about. Is both these characters in terms of image, use women in their image, right? It is through women that Coriolanus Snow is able to rise into power. Women shape him a lot of the times, actually. His mother shapes him, his associates shapes him, Dr. Volumina Gall shapes him. It's so funny because I kept on thinking about how Trump uses women in his image, from his press secretary, her name is Caroline Levitt, to another woman called Pam Bondi. I forgot her position now. I find it interesting that Trump does not use a man as his press secretary, but uses a woman. And the woman that he always hires to be around him in his administration all kind of look the same, right? They're all blondes most of the time. They all have that Mar-a-Lago face. Like, there's a certain image that he continues to use. But I wonder if that was strategic on his part. And in fact, a lot of things are strategic within the White House. Let's not be obtuse and stupid. A lot of things are strategic. A lot of photos are strategic. Like, everything that is done within the White House is strategic. But even using like Pam Bondi, Marjorie Taylor Greene, using these women and pushing them to the front to kind of soften the image of, see, women are also agreeing with what we're doing here. Right? Even the women agree with us, so it's fine. I definitely think that it has that kind of effect. I don't have the socio-anthropological understanding of what that term means, but it's something that I will point out, and I think it's very important to point out. Let us not also forget that in these last polls, one of the reasons that Trump was able to achieve such a sliding victory is due to the fact that a huge population that voted for him were in fact white women in the United States, right? Again, using women to come up into presidency or in a position of power is something that's super understated, but it's very, very important within both of these people, within both of these characters, should I say. But anyways, so those are some similarities I noticed. Again, I'm not making a grand conclusion. Everything in this video is alleged, please. But it's important to note these parallels. Let's talk about, why are the Patriot games so scary? Also, side note, the sun is shining, and I think that's literally so beautiful. So I'm just gonna bask in that for a second as a pause from all this crap, just absolute garbage. At number one, I think it's the juxtaposition between how people are suffering on a daily basis, protesting and fighting for their rights, and a game or an event is being used to fix the image of the country, while the same administration doesn't focus on the reality. So there's an amazing essay that I'm going to cite here called The Society of Spectacle. I will link that in below so you can read about it. I thought it was an interesting way to sort of explain what I mean. Basically, this essay talks about how the society of the Hunger Games, right, is a society of spectacle. And it says that basically it's a state of advanced capitalism where life is reduced to a sort of accumulation of spectacle, meaning that the representations of reality take precedence over real life. In other words, these spectacles through media, games, TV attract people's attention so much so that they become sort of passive consumers who are unable to see or refuse to see the underlying injustices of the society. Basically, a huge form of distraction, a society that uses distractions constantly to distract from the actual reality of what's going on. In this essay, Deborah quotes that the spectacle is a guardian of sleep, of deep societal sleep, preventing the population from waking up to the reality of their dictatorship. If you are focused on these games and you're focused on spectacles, because it requires so much of our attention and so much energy, and we kind of forget what is happening right now in the very second, it's just another form of distraction that's taken away from the fact that people in the States are suffering. In the Hunger Games, this is also identified as well, how President Snow utilizes the annual Hunger Games as a spectacle strategy to control the population, basically. The games, first of all, they sort of split people because they're forcing districts to compete with one another for survival and prizes. Now, granted, hopefully the Patriot Games doesn't ensure the same thing, but the fact that the core is still there of competitiveness rather than unity between different districts. The capital therefore ensures that they remain divided and focused on one another as enemies rather than their common oppressor. Number two, another thing that's really scary about the Patriot Games is the manner of which these games are being announced is equally as unserious as how the Hunger Games were announced. So as I said earlier in this video, Casca Highbottom was the one who mentioned the idea in the academy in the Capitol. And again, he just said it as a general idea. He did not necessarily expect it to be this spectacle. He just said it, and unfortunately, you couldn't revoke it. And Dr. Volumina Gall, who was very much in charge for a long time within Panem on enforcing these games, on enforcing what's happening with the game makers, took this idea very, very seriously. That same sort of nonchalantness about how such an evil thing starts is eerily similar to how President Trump can just announce a Patriot Games casually and then not give information. They are both starting on very unserious grounds, and I think that in that unseriousness, people don't tend to take it seriously. Another thing that's very alarming about the Patriot Games is the use of children. So, like I said, President Trump specifically mentioned that he's going to use a high school student from each state, and I find it interesting that he mentions using teenagers or high school students who are most likely going to be minors and not seasoned athletes who come from different states who are ready to represent the country. If he had perhaps said that, oh, we're going to take one man and one woman that have competed maybe in the Olympics, and then we're going to have this like sort of inter-house, inter-country sort of Olympics of our own, fine. Okay, people I feel like would have just been like, okay, he's trying to just make his own Olympics, whatever. But the fact that he's specifically targeting children and high school students is a bit alarming. Why do we need to involve high school students? I want to be delusional and I want to believe that hopefully, maybe through, if these games exist, right, kids can be recognized for their talent and be given awards for competing. Unfortunately, he has not announced plans to do that. So I'm very curious as to how this is supposed to go. In conclusion, this could all just be insanity and hopefully it's nothing to worry about. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Tell me down in the comments below how you're feeling. This was quite a bit. So I would try and make like a sort of light-hearted video the next time. This month, I shall be having more reviews coming out. So I'm very, very excited. And also this is the month of Bridgerton, girls. And I will see you guys in my next video. Okay, bye.
Oh my, oh my.